Okay, let me turn to the questions I have on card here. If you believe the measuring of a specific or separate aspect of critical thinking is a problem in multiple choice tests measuring critical thinking, how do you justify your developing questions for the revised Watson-Glaser test that specifically measure fair-mindedness? Well, I believe that there is a role for aspect-specific tests. I think if you're concerned with a particular aspect, then it's reasonable to have a measure of it, and all of the tests provide you with some information. The key is not do you use a given test, but what do you use its information for, and how do you take it into account? There was one semester many years ago in which I pre- and post-tested my students using the Watson-Glaser, the old Watson-Glaser test. And I found at the end of the course that the average score was 3 points higher on that test, which is not particularly large, but it isn't insignificant, and I didn't in any way teach for the test. But I did find out some things. The most useful thing is that the students who scored very low on the test in the beginning had significant problems in the class. I also found that the student who made the biggest improvement on the test, 15 points, received a D in the course. Why? Because his score was so low in the beginning. So he started out with a very low score, improved by 15 points. If I had been grading in terms of value added, he would have received an A, but I use criterion reference tests, and so he didn't. So it gave me information that was of use. Nevertheless, I wouldn't count it as an adequate test of somebody's critical thinking in general. I would have no confidence that if they scored high on the Watson-Glaser test, that you should take them as an advisor when you go shopping in the mall or buying a car or anything else, because I know that, or feel fairly confident that performance on such tests do not necessarily transfer well to broader situations. 2, you were on the panel for the APA Delphi study on which the California Critical Thinking Skills Test is based. Why did you not at least mention this instrument? Actually, I was working off Robert's list, and it wasn't on Robert's list. Let me mention the California Critical Thinking Skills Test. It is a new critical thinking test, relatively new, and it is, again, machine scoreable, emphasizes aspects of critical thinking and then adds them up, and includes a dimension on dispositions. I have serious questions about the validity of the dispositional segment of the test, and one disappointment I have is that the standards implicit in the test are not made explicit so that the students or even the teachers who are using the test know what those standards ultimately are. Because the standards are expressed in terms of categories like analysis. Well, that category just isn't sufficient to know what the standard is. So I think it has strengths and weaknesses. And the Watson-Glaser test that I participated in has, I think, some significant weaknesses. And we have to take them one by one and see how they're constructed and how they relate to our instruction, and ask the question, if I get data from this, can I use it to improve my instruction? Or is it just going to be used to satisfy some outside group of evaluators? What recommendations will you be giving to the California Credentialing Commission on teacher preparation programs at colleges? Well, actually, the results of the study are still confidential, are not to be made public, but they will be available in a few weeks, and we'll be publishing a 400-page report on the status of preparation of teachers in California for critical thinking. That study will be published by the Commission on Teacher Credentialing in Sacramento, California. Multiple choice questions claim that critical thinking are free of discipline-specific dimensions. Is this true? There are general critical thinking abilities, but you always have to assess them with some content. So just as there are reading abilities, there are general reading abilities. You can have the skills of a good reader. Still, to assess you, you have to read something. So you cannot avoid content, but it doesn't follow from that that the skills are content specific. Indeed, if skills are content specific, then the concept of a general education becomes far less credible, because how are we going to have transfer across dimensions if everything is unique to a particular domain? Why wouldn't we have to have a different writing class for every subject, a different thinking class for every subject, a different reading class for every subject, a different listening class for every subject, and so forth? Philip, do you want to make a point?
Isn't that John McPeck's argument?
Yes, but I think the evidence is overwhelmingly against it. And I think that it's unfortunate that despite the volumes of evidence presented, he still adheres to the same position. But let me give you an example. All I can do is give examples here. Suppose you say, let's take the criterion of clarity of thought. I'll give you 3 strategies for clarifying thinking. They apply to every subject. State the idea, elaborate the idea in other terms, illustrate the idea with an analogy, a metaphor, or a diagram, and cite an experience that links the idea to a concrete situation. Now, these are 4 strategies of a universal nature. I use them whether I'm talking to my doctor, my lawyer, somebody selling a product, discussing something with my wife and I don't understand what she means. Now, what can one do except generate examples where you can go beyond subject specific? How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler. So this is my first critical thinking text, which shaped my critical thinking, and I use it in all my courses. And it is not about reading in a particular domain. It's about how to read a serious book. You can look at it. That was available in 1939. So the evidence is there, but we can't, of course, force any particular person to look at the evidence if they are convinced a priori that there can be no transfer of the sort that we're talking about.